こんにちは。私はHakonです。今日は元ひらがなを学びます。Hello, my name is Hakon, and today we will learn more hiragana again. um, so last time we went through the na and the ha lines of the syllabary, and I'll just recap now what the characters we've learned so far. So we got the first ones, the a, I, u, e, o, ka, ki, ku, ke, ko, and then we have the ones with the what looks like a quotation mark, the dakuten, added to the K line, and that becomes ga, gi, gu, ge, go. Then we have the next line, sa, shi, su, se, so, and then again with the dakuten, za, or za, ji, zu, ze, zo. Could be zu, ze, zo, depending on the context, but this is always written like za, zu, ze, zo. And if you pronounce it like that, that's fine. I think if you do that consistently, you would be fine with Japanese. Indeed, when we learned Japanese in school, we only pronounce it like za, zu, ze, zo, I think. Ta, chi, tsu, te, to. And the one with the voiced version, the voiced line, the da, ji, zu, te, to. Again, two characters here that are pronounced the same on the T, on the D line as on the Z line, but of course used differently depending on what they're derived from. Because very often the voicing is a change in sound as well in Japanese, just like it is in other languages. Na, ni, nu, ne, no. Ha, hi, hi, fu, he, ho. Ba, bi, bu, be, bo. Pa, pi, pu, pe, po. And of course with the H line, when you add the dakuten, you get the B line, B, and the P's when you add the handakuten, which is the half dakuten, literally, which is the other diacritic symbol. This is only used on the P line of the syllabary. That's the only place you'll see the handakuten. So when you see this character on this little round, like a degree symbol, or a Japanese full stop as well, it is always a P sound. Pa, pi, pu, pe, po. So, next one up is, for those who have kept abreast and done some homework perhaps, is the M line. Now, there's, I'm sure there are songs and things you can learn how to sort of remember the order of the syllabary. I think we just learned to say akasata na hamayara wa, and that's the order of them. Akasata na hamayara wa. And I just learned that by heart very quickly, and that's always stuck with me. I'm sure there are sort of alphabet songs and things in Japanese as well, just like there are in other languages. So let's do the ma line. Ma, mi, mu, me, and mo. And in the ma line, there are some characters that are very easy to confuse with some of the ones from the end line. I'll point those out to you. First, we have ma. And then we have mi. Let's make sure I get it right here. Mu is a slightly peculiar one, actually. Oh, I'm not sure I did that very nicely, but okay, so I'll just try again. Yeah, well, it's not perfect, but it's understandable. It's legible. Me, that's the one that starts looking a bit like a character from the end line. Starts exactly the same, but without the round squiggle at the end. I'll just show you that one now. So if you remember the new character, it looks like this. This looks exactly the same as me, but with the extra little orbit there at the end. So those two, quite easy to mix up, but also because they're so similar, you can remember them together. So you remember that the The one with the squiggle is the one on the end line, the nu, and then you remember that me is the one without. But because there are different vowels as well, it makes it harder to, it's easier to mix them up as well, I think. And then mo is, it's like a she, a little bit more like hook actually, but, and also she with a ko on top of it, a little ko on top of a she. So that's one way to remember it as well. So when you remember them as remember the characters and how they are similar to each other often helps, I think. People have different ways of remembering them, but that's one of the things I do. So there's an important note here. You don't write the more like so. It always is. So see what I'm doing? I'm doing it like, of course I'm going there and I'm turning left like that. So it's, yeah, so it doesn't become, it feels different to doing it like that because it's almost like you're curving it a bit because you're thinking you're writing a ko rather than doing like so. If you see the difference, it's quite subtle, but it does make a difference to how you do it. If you stylize it, I suppose you could do the straight lines, but that little bit of curvature, it's almost like you're thinking you're doing a Zorro mark, but you're leaving out the middle bit. Anyway, okay, so next line is ya, or the Y line. And of course, you'll be using that quite a bit because you need these characters for the glides, the kya, kyu, kyo, gya, gyu, gyo characters, of which there are quite a few in Japanese. You looks a bit like a fish to me. And then yo. Now this little horizontal line there doesn't cross the one that goes down, important. So these are the ones you use in a small version to create the glides, the kya, kyu, kyo. So for instance, just to show you now, this shows in the screen, yes. So we have ki, for instance. So normal size ki, and then we add a small ya, and that becomes kya. So that's the single syllable kya. This is the ya, you, yo, and then we can do, there aren't that many left now actually. Let's do the next one as well. That's the R line. Akasata na hama yara wa. So almost done. Ra. That looks familiar because it's similar to some other ones we've had. Ri. So again, it has some similarities to the sort of to the E and the ko, but one side here is much longer than the other. So that's an important distinction. Ra, ri, ru. Like so. Also a little round bit at the end, which doesn't cross over, by the way. Re. Now that looks very familiar because we've seen that before as well. If you remember the ne character, oh, there we are, ne character, it looks like that, and re looks like that, and there's a third one as well that looks exactly like it. We'll do that today as well. And then it's the ro, which looks almost exactly like the ru, but without the round thing at the end. But in this case, because they're on the same row, they're easier to distinguish and remember the difference between them than if you have things like the me looking like the nu, for instance. So ra, ri, ru, re, ro. Which leaves only 3 characters, actually, and we'll do those right away. So that is the w line. and then it's wa, and this is the one that also looks like me and like ne as well. So we got these three characters look exactly the same in the beginning, but there's one curved, one going back, and one with the little squiggle at the end. And then there's nothing in between here. There are some historical characters. I'm not going to teach you those actually, because that is not important. It's for more advanced stuff. I'll talk about those some other time maybe, but they're not important at all. In fact, in 3 years of school, I didn't learn about them. It's just nice to know that they exist, first of all. I'm not going to add them now. You already have enough to learn with these characters, because you're learning about 50 characters, and then it's a combination. So there's twice as many letters as the Latin alphabet, pretty much. So, but you need to know the O, or what used historically to be a wo. This is one you're going to use a lot, because this is the object particle. Every time a word is an object in a sentence, which is pretty much all the time, this is the character used to denote that something is of the object case. So that's the case marker for object. It's a particle for an object. And now on this line, usually also, but not in the same columns, you add on the side normally the n character, which also looks a bit like an n actually. It looks like an n, so you can. So normal n is like that. Japanese n is like that. Also looks a bit like an h, but yes, it's also one of those characters that once you know it, you can't imagine it being anything else than what it is. And there are a few of those, I think. Also the ya to me, because it looks a bit like a y. Also the u as well. And yeah, maybe there are other characters that you sort of associate right away with what they mean when you see them. And that actually concludes our run through of the basic hiragana characters. And then remember that you can also create the glides with things on the K line. So we have our kya, and we have our q, and we have our kyo. So make sure that when you do these, that you write the y line characters so small that it's very clear that they are not their own syllable, because it could conceivably be a word that is kiya something. It is possible. So it's important that you make them very distinctive, and it's easy to see that they are small. So I think it's about half the size, half height actually is something to aim for anyway. And when you're doing those. Now remember last time I said that when you doubled consonants in Japanese, as in matcha, you're adding a little tsu character. And now that we actually have gone through all the hiragana, we know how to write this now. So if you remember, ma is like so. And then you have a little tsu. And then it's the, I'll just double check now, I'm not making a mistake. And then we are doing our chi. And then finally the ya. So that's matcha. So we'll get back to every time we do a word in Japanese now, we will be writing it in hiragana. As a way to teach you how to do it, and also to remind me how to do it. I don't know them all by heart at the moment. I would struggle a little bit to try to write them all out. I'll be honest, because I am learning this myself now as I'm teaching you about it and talking about it. So, but that is the 50 characters as they're known in Japanese. Fun Funny story, I'll do a little anecdote now because in the old days it was quite common to refer to the characters or the syllables of Japanese as the Iroha. Um, I'll just Iroha. And that stems from if you can imagine that somebody writes a poem or a text that uses each of the different 50 basic characters, if you just ignore the diacritics for now, if you ignore the diacritics and say that you can use either with or without, and because in many ways they're considered varieties of the same character, if you create a poem that uses every single character only once, and that is what the Iroha is. It's a poem from, I believe, from the 12th century that uses each of the 50 characters of the basic syllabary only once. And that actually became the way to write the anything that was alphabetized in, as we know it, of course, in Japanese, was by the Iroha system. So anything that starts with an I comes first, and then it's the ro, and then it's the ha, etc. And I can't remember the rest of the poem. If you look it up on Wikipedia, the whole thing says there. And to this day, when you and also note values as well. When you had the like in of course in English we talk about do re mi fa sol la ti with note names. In Japanese, it used to be Iroha, etc. And also, when you're talking about learning your ABCs, your basics in Japanese, you would call it learning your Iroha. So, so that poem and that order of syllables that it created by creating a perfect poem using only each syllable only once, each character only once, has become a way to organize things in Japan. So I think that is quite interesting and something that you should look up and have a look at, because it's one of the fun things about Japanese. I didn't learn about that in school, actually. That's one thing that was never mentioned in Japanese class, but it's one of those things I've learned since that I found very fascinating. And if we had learned about that in Japanese class, it would have been one of those things that I would have been telling people about over the last 30 years. So, yeah, it would have been fun to know that 30 years ago, but I know it now and I will tell people about it because I think it's very fascinating. One of these days I'll show the poem to you as well. Anyway, right, so that's the Iroha. So we are now learning our Iroha of Japanese in this course. Yeah, let's call it the course. So we've done all the hiragana now. I will be repeating those next time. I will go through all of them again. I'll probably print them out a bit to make them like I've done with the aka and ga from before. And I will make it look nice and neat. And I'll talk a bit about, point out the ones that are similar. And I will maybe start teaching you some words and or phrases. And we'll write those in Japanese with hiragana. And maybe I'll start you on the first kanji as well. Starting with 2 or 3 maybe. And also I'll probably say something about the different pronunciations of kanji again as well. So right, that's it for this time. Thank you for watching, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you next time in the next episode of me learning Japanese and talking about it at the same time so that others might actually learn a little bit from it. Again, this is not the best structured Japanese course. It's just a sort of an improvised one. And yeah, I think it's just fun to make for me. Anyway, domo arigatou gozaimasu and sayonara. Goodbye for now.